So when you hear the word Confucianism, what comes to mind? Probably some ancient philosophy, right? Something old, unchanging, maybe even a little dusty. But what if I told you that that's not really the whole story, not even close? We're going to dive into this because the history of Confucian thought is this incredible, dynamic story of debate, reinvention, and constant change.
Yeah, that's right. For over 2,500 years, this philosophy hasn't just been sitting on a shelf. It's been in this constant conversation with itself, with the world, with new ideas. It's a living tradition, one that's been forced to face huge intellectual challenges and completely reinvent itself to survive.
So, to get a handle on this whole evolution, we can really break it down into three big phases. You've got the classical origins, then its big reinvention into something called Neo-Confucianism, and finally, its modern form, which people call New Confucianism. Let's, start at the very beginning. All right, so classical Confucianism. Right from the get-go, the tradition's first big internal hurdle wasn't about politics or how to run a country. Nope, it was something way deeper, way more fundamental. It was a debate about the very essence of what it means to be human. And this debate was, wow, a total clash of ideas. On one side, you've got this guy, Mencius. He was convinced that we're all born fundamentally good, that virtues like compassion are just built into us, innate. But then on the other side, you have Xunzi, and he's like, no way. He thought our basic nature is a mess, totally chaotic. For him, virtue is something you have to impose through tough education and strict rituals. So they both believed in becoming a better person, right? But they were starting from completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, so let's fast forward a few hundred years. Confucianism is now facing this massive challenge, but this time it's from the outside. Buddhism and Taoism were exploding in popularity. And they weren't just religions, they were these incredibly sophisticated philosophies with really compelling answers to all the big questions. The nature of the universe, reality, what happens after we die. And honestly, these were things that classical Confucianism just didn't really have a lot to say about. So what was the response? Well, it was brilliant, actually. It was Neo-Confucianism. Think of it like a philosophical remix. These thinkers took the core ethical teachings of Confucius and masterfully blended them with some of the big-picture metaphysical ideas from Buddhism and Taoism. The result? A totally comprehensive system, one that could explain, well, everything, from the grand structure of the cosmos right down to how you as an individual could become a better person. And the main architect of all this, the guy who really put it all together, was Xunzi. He was the great synthesizer. He took all these different threads and wove them into this single, coherent philosophy. And his version was just so powerful because it gave everyone, from scholars to emperors, this unified worldview. It was deep enough to go toe-to-toe with Buddhist philosophy, but it was also incredibly practical. It connected these huge cosmic ideas directly to everyday ethics and how you should run a country. And this is where the story really explodes beyond just intellectual debate. Xunzi's system wasn't just some theory for scholars to argue about in a quiet room. Oh no, it went mainstream. It became state ideology. It spread like wildfire across East Asia, becoming the literal philosophical backbone for entire nations. I mean, the influence was just immense. And why was it so popular? Well, it was basically a ready-made blueprint for how to run a society. It offered social order, a way to run the government efficiently, and a moral reason for rulers to be in charge. Think about it. In Korea, the entire Joseon dynasty was built on its principles. In Japan, it gave shape to the famous samurai code Bushido. And in Vietnam, it was the very framework for the imperial civil service. And you can still see the echoes of this today, for sure. When you see students in Korea visiting these ancient Confucian academies, they're not just tourist spots. They're a living link to this history. In fact, so many of the core cultural values you see across the region, that deep, profound respect for elders and family, that's a direct legacy of these centuries of Neo-Confucian influence. Okay, so that brings us to the modern era. And guess what? Another huge challenge. But this time, it's coming from the West. And this was a head-on collision of worldviews. You had the Confucian focus on community, on knowing your role, on social hierarchy, clashing directly with Western ideas of individualism, universal human rights, and democracy. And the response to this challenge? It became known as New Confucianism. You had scholars starting this massive project to really engage with Western thought. They weren't just trying to defend their tradition and build a wall around it. They were actively asking, how can our philosophy adopt? What can it contribute to this new global conversation? How does it stay relevant? And that leads us to the big central question that they're still wrestling with right now. I mean, how can a philosophy that's built on social roles and a certain kind of hierarchy, how can it possibly adapt to a world that's all about individual rights and democratic equality? It's a really fascinating and, frankly, a very difficult puzzle to solve. And this debate is happening right now. It's very much alive. You've got some thinkers arguing that, hey, maybe Confucian values like social harmony and respect for education could actually lead to a new, distinctly Asian kind of democracy, a really stable one. But then you have others, the critics, who say the tradition needs a complete, radical overhaul, especially when it comes to its old ideas about hierarchy and the role of women. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, from that ancient argument between Mencius and Xunzi all the way to today's grappling with democracy, you see the real takeaway. The one constant in Confucianism isn't some fixed, unchanging rulebook. Its true power, its real secret, has always been its incredible ability to change, to adapt, and to reinterpret itself for a new age. And really, that leaves us all with a much bigger question, doesn't it? As we all try to figure out our own complex modern world, the story of Confucianism kind of forces us to ask, what do we do with ancient wisdom? What role should it play in our lives today? Should we preserve it like a museum piece? Should we try to reform it? Or is it something else entirely? The answer? Well, it's probably just as complex and evolving as the tradition itself.